Pois edita. Ok. Well, um, acho que você colocou. Ok. Bom. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone. Boa tarde, bom dia, boa noite para todos. Bem-vindos à terceira sessão, nesse ano do ciclo de encontros, estudos de gênero e conhecimento clássico, organizado pelo EuGeStA como parte do projeto Estudos de Gênero e Conhecimento Clássico. EuGeStA é uma rede europeia de estudos de gênero na Antiguidade e foi fundada pela professora Jacqueline Fabre-Serris, uma latinista da Universidade de Lille, em 2009. A rede reúne pesquisadores de diversas áreas nos estudos da Antiguidade, incluindo estudos de linguagem, literatura, arqueologia, economia, direito, medicina, filosofia, história, história da arte, religião e estudos de recepção. E todos esses pesquisadores compartilham, então, interesse por questões de gênero. Em 2011, uma revista, né, acadêmica foi fundada, editada pela professora Jacqueline Fabre-Serris e pela professora Judith Hallett. Mais informações sobre o projeto e sobre essa revista vocês podem encontrar no site. Numa nova fase dessa rede de estudos de gênero, nós criamos esse ciclo de encontros que já está no seu segundo ano. O objetivo é divulgar publicações importantes na área de estudos de gênero, numa num período, né, de 2 vezes ao semestre, né? Então, a cada semestre temos 2 atividades. Depois de 4 sessões no último ano e 2 neste ano, né, que estão todas gravadas e podem ser acessadas no canal do YouTube, nós estamos retomando as atividades, né, nessa primavera aqui para o sul global, né, e outono para vocês acima da linha do Equador. E nós teremos a apresentação de 2 livros, né, comentados por seus autores e depois comentados por convidados, né, que falarão sobre eles também. A estrutura é uma breve introdução que eu faço e depois cada autor ou grupo de autores, editores, fala por 15 minutos e depois 10 minutos para cada comentador. A sessão, então, tem previsão de 1 hora e 20 minutos, podendo se estender por mais 10 minutos, se necessário. Eu não vou ser draconiana, né, no tempo, mas eu espero que todos sigam, né, e cooperem nesse sistema. Essa atividade, ela é multilingüe, né? O inglês é a linguagem que nós usamos, ah, palestrantes e respondentes, né? Mas os participantes podem falar também nas suas línguas específicas, francês, espanhol, italiano, português, enfim, como estou falando agora. A única coisa que nós solicitamos é que haja uma versão do texto em inglês projetada, né, em geral, na tela. Isso, para nós, é um modo de estimular, né, e dar visibilidade também a trabalhos de pessoas de diversas partes do mundo. E gostaria de chamar a atenção também para o fato de que os respondentes, os comentadores, eles vão centralizar ou destacar algum aspecto importante do livro ou alguma questão relativa ao tema do livro, mais do que dar uma análise detalhada ou fazer uma resenha do livro, né? Nesta edição, nós temos 2 textos, né? O primeiro, Wedding, Gender and Performance in Ancient Greece, publicado pela Oxford em 2024, que foi escrito por Andromake Karanika, professor de estudos clássicos, né, na Universidade da Califórnia, em Irvine, e que publicou já vários artigos sobre Homero, religião, rituais gregos, oralidade em trabalhos de mulheres, poesia pastoral e literatura na Antiguidade Tardia e Bizâncio. A respondente é Helena Dulce Pastor, uma historiadora espanhola especializada em história antiga e que é professora assistente no Departamento de Estudos Antigos e de História Antiga e Medieval, Paleografia, Diplomacia na Universidade Autônoma de Madrid. O segundo livro é Believing Ancient Women, Feminist Epistemology for Greece and Rome, publicado pela Universidade de Edinburgh em 2023 em hardcover e 2025 em paperback. E ele é editado por Megan Bowen, doutora em estudos clássicos da Universidade de Virgínia, com trabalho sobre a oração e o poder nas metamorfoses de Ovídio, por Mary Gilbert, professora assistente de estudos clássicos na Universidade de Mississippi, e que pesquisa sobre o drama greco-romano, estudos de recepção e gênero, e Edith Nally, professora assistente de filosofia, né, e também professora, ela é associada a, como membro do Programa de Estudos Clássicos e Raça, Etnia e Gênero, Estudos de Gênero, no Departamento da Universidade de Missouri, Kansas. E ela tem publicações importantes sobre Platão, né, questão da erótica e da questão filosófica em Platão. O respondente, comentador, é o professor Rafael Silva, que leciona literatura na Universidade do Estado do Ceará, no campus de Aracati, e que trabalha com literatura, filosofia e história antigas. Antes de passar, né, a palavra aos apresentadores, eu gostaria de agradecer a Sofia Moraes e Nicolas Casemiro, ela mestranda no Programa de Estudos Clássicos e ele graduando em Filosofia na Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais, onde eu também atuo no Departamento de Filosofia. Agradeço a eles pela assistência. Então, eu passo a palavra ao nosso primeiro palestrante, a nossa primeira palestrante. Eu não sei se, não vi aqui se a Andromake chegou. Andromake? Bom, acho que ela ou teve algum problema, não. Então, nós vamos inverter a ordem e eu passo a palavra, então, a Mary, a Nally, e a Megan, né, para a apresentação delas. Então, muito obrigada. Thank you very much, Megan Hamley, please.
Thank you. I'm going to start. I'm Edith Nally. Thanks for inviting us to present our edited volume today. We very much appreciate the organizers for making this possible. I would also like to begin by projecting the names of our many esteemed contributors. So that's the next slide, Sophia. Thank you. I won't cover any of these chapters in detail, though I hope you will go and check them out. The volume is now out in paperback with Edinburgh University Press. I'm going to give a brief overview of the volume's aims as a whole. This is slide 3. Thank you. Believing Ancient Women uses the central insights of feminist epistemological theory to interpret classical sources. It examines how epistemic concepts from Greco-Roman antiquity and its reception intersect with social identities, past and present, and in so doing aims to reseed the field of classics with oppressed, ignored, and otherwise systematically marginalized voices. So what is feminist epistemology? That's the first question we always get. As most will be aware, epistemology, as it has traditionally been understood, refers to the study of knowledge. The term has been stretched well beyond its original meaning and now denotes the study of all those concepts related to knowledge, like understanding, wisdom, belief, ignorance, and the varying conditions that produce these states, like justification, evidence, objectivity, testimony, and rationality, among others. Feminist epistemologists are unified, if anything, the view that social and political identities, especially sex, gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, class, ability, age, and nationality, just to name a few, are significant in the formation and study of epistemic concepts. All of this is just to say, feminist epistemologists believe that the epistemic realm is not immune to systems of power. This view runs counter to a very long scholarly tradition of taking such concepts, especially standards like knowledge and justification and truth, to occupy an impartial realm separate from prejudice and other social distortions. Feminist epistemologists have demonstrated that this is not so. What someone knows or is perceived as knowing, who the authorities on a subject are, how credible an account is, what evidence seems pertinent, and what conclusions are most rational are all subject to domination and oppression. A major reason that feminist epistemic theory has grown so rapidly in academic circles is that it promises to expose injustices at the root of our systems of thought. Feminist epistemologists often challenge seemingly unassailable facts about the life of the mind, many of which have been perpetuated as such to systematically exclude women, people of color, and other oppressed groups from academic and other dominant spheres of discourse, like science and media and politics and so forth. Feminist epistemological theory promises to break new ground in which, before unheard, ignored, and suppressed groups might find space to express their unique epistemic stories. Next slide, please. Just to give a brief preview of the sorts of theoretical frameworks included in the volume, we organize feminist epistemologies into three broad categories. The first is standpoint theory, according to which different standpoints, or kind of broadly points of view, especially those acquired by non-dominant or marginalized knowers, can result in privileged access to certain facts or values unavailable to the dominant culture. So, for example, Nancy Hartsock has argued that because of the relational, concrete, and bodily nature of caregiving labor, caregivers, historically women, are in a unique epistemic position to detect the inadequacies of male-dominated capitalist societies. This view is sometimes summarized as a view that there is situated knowledge, or that a person's social location has epistemic significance. Second is anti-atomism. This strand of feminist epistemology takes on the long-standing academic and cultural presumption that knowers are atomistic, in the sense that knowledge is stereotypically identified with the view from nowhere, on which ideal epistemic agents are pure rationality, a mind without a particular body and lived experiences. Anti-atomist feminist epistemologists point out that knowledge isn't individualistic like this, nor is it acquired without a body or emotions. Third are theories concerning epistemic injustice. These study forms of discrimination that, to quote Miranda Fricker, impact someone's capacity as a knower. Epistemic injustice comes in many varieties, including testimonial injustice, which occurs when prejudice causes a hearer to give a deflated level of credibility to a speaker's word, and hermeneutic injustice, or when someone has a significant area of their social experience obscured from understanding owing to prejudicial flaws in shared resources for social interpretation. That's a lot of information, and I'm really happy to discuss all this in the comments. This volume deploys feminist epistemic theories like these to the study of classical antiquity. Now, to further illustrate the spirit of this project, I'll turn it over to Mary Hamill, who is going to present two case studies we discuss in the introduction, which serve as examples of what the volume's contributors do in more depth in each chapter.
Thank you, Gwen. Okay, so I'm going to present a reading of a passage in Xenophon's Oikonomicus, and then at the other end of antiquity, a passage from Wibia Perpetua's Prison Diary, just to give you a taste of how systems of power infiltrate the epistemic realm in ancient texts and what we do in the volume. So go ahead and change the slide, please. Thank you. In Xenophon's dialogue, Socrates asks how Ischomachus's wife was educated. What did she learn during her upbringing, and what did her husband teach her? Ischomachus's reply addresses his wife's epistemic standing. He says, "What knowledge could she have had, Socrates, when I received her? She was not quite 15 when she came to me, and before that time she was under constant supervision, seeing, hearing, and speaking as little as possible. Save for a basic knowledge of weaving and a docile temperament, Ischomachus claims that his wife came to him without knowledge. Ischomachus's wife's subordination, then, extends to her epistemic life. She learned what she learned, she knows what she knows, and she believes what she believes as governed by the restrictive gender norms of classical Athens. Her lack of knowledge, her lack of experience, her lack of confidence, held up as ideal by the men who discuss her, are symptoms of the way in which her society exerts control over women, reinforcing and perpetuating male domination. But the education of Ischomachus's wife does not stop there. Slide, please. Ischomachus eventually entrusts her with the education of an enslaved woman, claiming that it will be a pleasure to pass on her domestic knowledge, to make the enslaved woman who was originally ignorant into someone who is now knowledgeable, epistemona. And in so doing, she will double that enslaved woman's worth. He also promises her the pleasure of rewarding those enslaved people she finds particularly docile and of punishing any enslaved person who reveals herself to be trouble, honeros. In this way, Ischomachus invites his wife to enjoy some of the perks of the patriarchal system. This wife, who came to him a blank slate in her youth, has now transformed into an agent of epistemic domination herself. Not only has she had the lessons of her oppressors inscribed upon her, she now inscribes them upon others. Slide, please. Epistemologies of ignorance, a concept coined by feminist epistemologist Jose Medina, help us understand Ischomachus's wife as both victim and perpetrator of epistemic domination. Whereas traditional epistemology has largely concentrated on the production of knowledge, assuming that ignorance is simply a lack thereof, feminist epistemologists argue to the contrary, that ignorance is actually much more complex. It is the result of social and political forces which sustain and perpetuate collective unawareness of liberatory ways of thinking. The purpose of recognizing that Ischomachus's wife's ignorance is maintained by her oppressors is not to excuse her as an active participant in grotesque institutions like slavery, far from it, but it is to show that she has less control over her ignorance than her oppressors. A central tenet of Medina's project claims that paying this kind of fine-grained attention to the sources of ignorance will be necessary for dismantling the systems which produce it. At the other end of antiquity, slide please, Vibia Perpetua, an African woman living in Roman Carthage, wrote a prose account of the time she spent in a Roman prison that numbers among the very few extant woman-authored ancient texts. The visions Perpetua recounts in the days leading up to her martyrdom are full of vivid, sensual language, which communicate her heightened physical embodied experiences. She sees a ladder, she steps on a snake, she chews some cheese, and so on. Yet we show that Perpetua is giving far more than a report of her own firsthand subjective religious experience. She also claims authoritative, God-given knowledge with which to interpret these visions and their meanings. We see this in the fact that she uses concrete verbs of knowing to bracket the sensual descriptions of her visions. In her 7 short paragraphs, she employs forms of cognosco twice, skio 3 times, and telego 5 times. Let's look at an example. So after recounting her 3rd and final vision, in which she strips naked and fights a gladiator, Perpetua doubles down on her identity as a knower. Slide, please. Oh, yes, that's the right slide. Alrighty. She says, and I understand intellexi, that I was going to fight against the devil, not wild animals, but I knew, skiebam, that victory would be mine. In short, the spectators of her execution may witness Perpetua die in gruesome fashion, but she glosses this apparent victory as a loss. Feminist epistemologists like the philosopher Lorraine Code, slide please, have written about the stereotypical associations of women with experience and sensation. Rather than being treated as authoritative, women are commonly treated as able to report only what they themselves have subjectively experienced. And yet, Code continues, experience in our society, and we would argue in ancient Greek and Roman society as well, is considered second class as compared to knowledge. Interestingly, however, in Perpetua's writing, we find a subtle reappropriation and inversion of these long-standing gender stereotypes. Perpetua uses her experiential and sensual visions to bolster her claims to epistemic authority. By closing each of her visions with a knowledge claim, Perpetua foresees the vast potential for future misunderstandings that's often there in martyrdom texts. And she works to wrest control of the narrative and specifically what her death means and what her death will mean in the future through these authoritative epistemic claims. In this way, Perpetua reappropriates her sensuous nature as a mark of her spiritual authority, embracing the stereotype of the embodied female experiencer and dissolving the boundaries between so-called subjective and objective claims to know. And now Megan.
Sorry, needed to unmute. Thanks, Mary. So I'll talk now a little bit about the book's overarching goals and what conclusions, if any, the volume leads to. And then I'd like to reflect a bit on the context in which this book came to fruition and encourage everyone to reflect on its current context, so the book's past and present. The volume was intended to introduce readers to feminist epistemology, and this is what Gwen explained and discussed well at the beginning through the introduction, but we also wanted the book to serve as a sustained case for the usefulness of feminist epistemology as a critical interpretive lens. And really how the volume does this is through the brilliant work of our contributors. So next slide. So this is through the quality of their work and conclusions. The volume proves the usefulness of this lens. Sorry, can you go to the next slide? Thanks. So as an example here, this image is from Tricia Kim's chapter, and she has a fabulous analysis of women in contemporary statuary compared to Hellenistic statuary. And I encourage everyone to check that out. This image is in the book as well. And I think one of the most exciting things about working on this volume was really the breadth of our contributors' knowledge and expertise. So we had Latinists and Hellenists, but our contributors also included, and if you want to go to the next slide, we can bring up the contributors list again. So art historians and medievalists and philosophers. And we really tried to present case studies across genres and time periods, not only to further debates within classical scholarship, but also to illustrate how broadly these theoretical approaches can be applied. Okay, next slide. So the second major objective of the book was to advance non-dominant standpoints in ancient texts and in the field of classics. So many of the chapters look to authors' text or evidence that have been underappreciated. They look to care about epistemic contributions of non-dominant groups and mind dominant sources for anti-narratives. And I think in writing to this theme in the introduction, we noticed that it was useful to coin sort of a new term within epistemology, evidentiary injustice. And this was to denote the phenomenon when first-person accounts of marginalized groups are suppressed or excluded en masse from the received bodies of evidence or relegated to the fringes due to perceived lack of relevance or importance. And I think this is something that is especially pertinent to examination of ancient Greece and Rome. Okay, and then our third sort of theme or goal was to expose long-standing and complicated forms of epistemic injustice and really to lay the groundwork for discussing transhistorical connections. So the title of the volume itself, Believing Ancient Women, very obviously sort of initiates this process by making reference to contemporary movements and in particular, hashtag Believe Women and hashtag Me Too. And I think we all recognize that every book is a product of its time, and ours is no exception. So, in aiming to lay the foundations for discussions between past and present, we deliberately and explicitly included references to contemporary events. And I think one of the most interesting things, at least for me, is sort of rereading those references now and reflecting on the socio-political context in which this book came to fruition versus the socio-political context we're experiencing now, even a few years later. So globally, yes, but in particular in the United States, where we've had really enormous political and social upheaval in the last few years. So to seed some of that reflection, I'll mention some of the events swirling in the background of this book's creation and allow everyone to sort of reflect by themselves how it compares to the current climate, or maybe we can spend some time during the discussion thinking about that together. So this book started as at the 2021 Society for Climate Against Justice for Kavanaugh, the Harvey Weinstein trials, uh, uh, and the George Floyd protests, and then the compiling of the manuscript for the methodologies employed in this book are very much under attack in the United States right now. And I think that it's really important to acknowledge that this lens is important and it's needed now more than ever. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Megan, Mary, and Edith. As usual, you have the first speakers and the second speaker, and then you have the respondent. And Andromake is here. Hi, Andromake. She had a problem with the time zone. Hello, Andromake. Thank you very much. You are mute. Please turn on your phone. Andromake.
Hello, everyone. My
Yes.
deepest apologies, I think, from a prior communication and got on a different time zone. So I really apologize. This was unacceptable.
Oh, no problem at all. This is a conversation. So do you have
I have a PowerPoint, so if I can share that.
Ok, Sofia ou Nicolas podem compartilhar. My assistant will will give you the possibility to share.
Yes, just 1 minute.
Mhm.
Sure. Yeah. And thank you again for having me on this. This is really an honor. It's a group that I've been following, so it's quite a privilege to have your feedback and have this conversation.
Oh, our pleasure. Thank you.
Are you able to share?
Yes. So you can see my screen now, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So I'm starting with the moment when I received my book in the mail, and the first creature that greeted it was my cat, Aristophanes, here. So I felt I will share that. And I want to give a bit of an overview of how this book was conceptualized and go chapter by chapter. So the idea and the method that I've followed is to essentially trace the wedding song tradition, its imagery, and its tropes, with the understanding that this is a genre that gets crystallized throughout the ages. But first and foremost, I mean, part of my thinking was actually to explore how wedding poetics permeates ancient Greek literature. And of course, I started with Homer. So I analyzed both explicit, but I think, I mean, to my mind, my best contribution is the more implicit matrimonial references, with the goal to see how they actually shape archaic epic diction and became an integral part of the epic discourse. So the premises in the background of the book is that orally circulating texts, such as wedding songs, could have a life of their own, but beyond their original context, could also become, of course, an integral part of a different genre, in this case, epic, lyric, drama, and on. So I was particularly sensitive to seeing the many voices, I mean, including what I call ludic poetics, children's songs, hymns, paeans, and even ululations that are associated with the wedding genre. And I also sort of pushed a little bit subtly, I think, for a combination of ritualized discourse with what I call ludic childhood poetics, and I'll give a couple of examples today. I also had, and this is more in the second part of the book, an approach also in the first, from cognitive and trauma studies, because in my mind, very much it was to get as close as we can to the experience of people. And of course, there is a great conversation on emotions in Antiquity. There's a lot happening in that. It's like a booming sort of area or subfield, I can call it. And I think I also had that subtly in my thinking. I went a little bit against the grain, the idea that it is an initiation ritual, in the sense, I mean, we all kind of get that, understand that, of course, a wedding is, from many perspectives, an initiation sort of into a new phase. No, I couldn't argue against that. But I think that a lot of scenes and a lot of the diction kind of really show that there are underlying threads that actually work against this sort of concept of a passage. And in a way, so I looked more carefully at patterns such as the eloping, the returning, the fail, the dead bride, and even more the idea of the female nostos, which I think is also a notion and a concept that we need to explore further. I mean, I looked at it more with regards to female characters, especially in tragedy, and a little bit in female authored poetry, and that is mostly Irina. But I think this was also in the background of my mind. Let me see, to move on to the next. Okay, how do I move on? Oh, here. Okay, so just to give an overview of the structure of the book. So it's presented in 4 fairly big sort of chapters, each of which has 5 bigger sections with subsections, most of them. And I kind of have a little bit, I mean, there's this, I put that geometric vase in my slide because it really shows that there's something in my mind that kind of likes symmetry in there. So it's kind of, I mean, since we're having this conversation, I don't want to just say what is in the book, but it's also how our mind as scholars work, and, you know, what we're more comfortable with in the way things are sort of presented. So the first is, I call it the shadow of a wedding, and it's on sensing archaic poetics view. The second chapter focuses more on the poetics of childhood, wedding, song, and performance view. And then the next, as I said, the third moves to the nostoi, returns a nostoi, and I'm kind of zooming in the bride figure. And the last chapter is, I call it decoding the nuptial poetics. So to give a little bit of a quick overview, the first chapter, which I call sort of sensing Greek poetics, the focus is mostly on epic, although I do have a little bit of lyric. I mean, not a little bit, but I mean, there is some lyric in there too, but it's primarily epic poetry. So it's sort of divided according to the senses. So seeing, I start with what I think is like the obvious starting point for anyone sort of writing anything on ancient weddings, and that is the wedding scene in Iliad 18, the Shield of Achilles. And then from there, I move to what is, of course, a very odd encounter between Helen and the elders of the Wall of Troy, and where we have, of course, all those references, those questions and answers. Who is this? Who is this? And I think this absorbs nuptial poetics. It absorbs also part of a catalog and a wooing scene for Helen when she was a bride, but the diction and how each sort of fighter from Agamemnon to Odysseus to Idomeneus is presented retains aspects of like praise poetry to the group. Then I move to hearing. This is really Odyssey 6, and I think there's very clear wedding diction, and in how Nausicaa is presented with Odysseus. I think Odysseus is very much kind of an inverted bride eventually when he is led to the palace of the Phaeacians. But again, the diction is really the salutation, the makarismos when Odysseus addresses Nausicaa, and some of that has been argued before, and I think I build on earlier arguments. My favorite in a way is the tasting, which looks, and this is actually, it's my favorite because it really is the basis of my next book project and something that I'm working on right now on the catalogs of women. And this is the moment when Persephone gives, at the moment when Demeter wants to find out what happened, that catalog, and I approach this from a trauma perspective. It's kind of traumatic memory. Touching moves to the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite, the big hymn, and looks at, again, crystallized vignettes of wedding performances, such as the praise of bride. And of course, the final section moves to Sappho 44, and there's a lot to be said about that. To move on, the next chapter, the second chapter, discusses what I call the elusive returns that the wedding repertoire enables. So I look at the more typified features more closely, like salutations, praise of the bride and groom, blessings, the makarismos as they can be reconstructed. It explores the weaving motif in Sappho Fragment 102 and compares wedding song imagery with epigrams and children's lore. One of my favorite, again, is Sappho 114, the virginity poem, Virginity, Virginity, Where Have You Been? And I kind of read that as a kind of a tag game along with other sources from the ancient world. And I think it is an interesting perspective to see the ludic aspect in there. Then I move into the Hymenaios, as one would expect, and of course genres like the paeans, the Gamilios Paion, referenced in Aristophanes' the Symphoria Zeusai, and with Theocritus's Idyll 18, as again one would expect, and the interweaving of orality and literacy in the wedding song tradition. And again, we have a girlhood sort of a situation in Theocritus as well. To move quickly, my third chapter moves to the nostoi, and it's something that's been very much in my mind, and more the bridal figure. and also considers the concept of the brides of Hades, and some wonderful scholarship has been done in the past on that. So I'm looking at primarily some characters, like, of course, Iphigenia, Cassandra, and sort of the quasi-bride, and etc. But I'm also looking at the protagonists of some of the wedding song traditions, such as Thetis, like I call them emblematic couples, problematic stories. So Thetis's image, I write there, is reduced to that of the bride in Alcaeus. This is from fragment 42. As she often appears on vases. So I'm very interested in this iconization, and it's something that is really going on even today, if you think about it, like there's, the picture of the bride. So this iconization and reduction at the same time work well within the specific social, political, and ideological context. So Thetis is an interesting figure because from a forced bride, as a right, she becomes a mourning mother. So from one to the other, one who can only return to her natal world with her sisters. So Thetis' role for Alcaeus, for example, sympathetic audience, is comfortable with this reduction technique, that of the bride. And I kind of compare a little bit, but very briefly, to kind of a Virgin Mary, Madonna, sort of this idea of the iconization in like from Annunciation scenes to sort of the maternal sort of aspect. I'm interested also in Medea, and again, how in a way she's obliterating her past as a wife and a mother when she returns. So it's the idea of the return, the nostos. And this is what I think is part of the wiring inherent in the heroine's DNA. In other words, a female return cannot take place unless the past is somehow erased, as if it never happened. So there's this interesting sort of bride. And if you think in epic, like Penelope, Andromake, they're referred to often as the polludoros, like they at the bridal moment. So as I write, the figure of the bride becomes again an iconic image capturing the imagination of literary narratives that feature many of the protagonists of the nuptial repertoire. Like Alcaeus captures Thetis' moment as a bride, records her post-wedding moment, choosing to disregard the tradition around her maternal self, and then Helen is a triple bride, two different husbands. So there is, Antigone never becomes the bride of a mortal groom, but eternalizes herself as a bride of Hades. So there is something with sort of this idea of how the bridal figure sort of is imposed and impressed. And I also there have an angle, kind of an anthropological angle from the modern Greek folk tradition, and with ballads where we have very, very interesting sort of presentations of the nostos theme. And the fourth and final chapter delves into the decoding of emotions. I'm particularly interested in arena. I'm also interested in the spinning, and the spinning as a scene that enables kind of what I call social networks. I even look at, I actually look at sort of spinning as a prop, as if it's part of a stage. The distaff is also very sort of big in my mind. It's a reference to material anchor within an immaterial poem. And a distaff also has the potential to wound and even kill. So there's a hidden inherent duplicity. I even look at the Annunciation scenes, again, from the Christian tradition, which because I thought it kind of enriched my thinking, where there's a thread, and because the thread is the beginning. And of course, if you think of the fates and everything, it's a very, very intense, intensely entangled deeper structures that are going on in here. In the same chapter, I move to, again, what I call the poetics of materiality. I focus on the polludoros, many gifts, many tears, the prop, the object, and also, again, part of the iconization. I also look at how, the groom addressing the groom. And again, I'm revisiting the sort of trying to decode what I call children's poetics with Sappho fragment 110, the doorkeepers that's kind of the, raise the roof kind of a great, very beautiful sort of fragment. And of course, if you look at it next to the epic scenes, when every time like Telemachus goes at a wedding when he's looking for his father and in Sparta, and we have the epic, all the big palace with a big roof. All these are interrelated in my mind, this kind of expansive proliferation and reduction. And I end with the Diosa Pate. I'm going back to the Iliad, and which is again a very weird narrative from many perspectives. And I think that we have in there a very early archaic ars amatoria, a kind of didactic type of narrative, remnant of a tradition of sensual discourse. So I think this is like and I don't want to take more of your time, but essentially it's going from, I'm trying to argue again that nuptial poetics are, stylized, but also easily adapted, appropriated, utilized in literature, the explicit, and of course it is, the wedding as a narrative also is a theme that is very malleable in many ways, but also nuptial performances can be playful, funny, light, or crude, just as they can be solemn and heavily ritualized. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Andromake, for this wonderful book too. We have two great books here, and I'm sure that we have a lot of comments. And I will give first the floor to Rafael to comment the first book, and after it, then to Elena. So please, Rafael.
Hello, everyone. Do you hear me? Yes, I think. Okay, I'd like to thank Professors Maria Cecília Coelho and Jacqueline Fabre-Serris, as well as Sofia Moraes, and the rest of the group who organized and promote this important event. I salute also the other members of this session and the public present here. What I'll present now is an abbreviated version of my original commentary, and if the authors would like to receive the full commentary, I can send it via email later. Believing Ancient Women, Feminist Epistemologies for Greece and Rome, edited by Megan Bowen, Mary Gilbert, and Edith Nally, is a timely and invigorating contribution to classical studies and feminist thought. As the editors note at the outset, the volume takes recent global movements to address inequities in credibility as its impetus, and in doing so, it positions itself at the cutting edge of scholarship that challenges entrenched hierarchies of knowledge. The project's title alone signals its methodological courage. To believe ancient women is to resist dismissals that have too often reduced their voices to marginalia, suspicion, or silence, so it is a way of believing women in the field of classical studies. The introduction makes clear that the book's ambitions reach beyond simple recovery of neglected sources by exploring the intricate ways that systems of power can infiltrate the epistemic realm. The editors highlight how questions of credibility, authority, and truth are always bound up in relations of power. This framing opens rich and fertile ground for future scholarship in both classical studies and their receptions, since it draws attention not only to what was said by women in antiquity, but also to how their testimony has been filtered, discredited, or reinterpreted across centuries. Equally insightful is the introduction's treatment of interpretive strategies, which offers readers a vocabulary for engaging ancient texts in ways that are both critical and constructive. The distinction between resisting and releasing readings, as well as between optimistic and pessimistic readings of authorial intention, for instance, empowers scholars to navigate the ideological terrain of classical works without either capitulating to their prejudices or dismissing them outright. A resisting reading, for example, exposes the gendered or exclusionary assumptions embedded in a text, while a releasing reading recovers possibilities for women's and other marginalized groups' voices that have been suppressed by the critical tradition. This dual approach encourages a flexibility of method that avoids the trap of reading ancient sources as either hopelessly patriarchal or proto-feminist. One can understand the violence and injustice women suffered as people living ordinary lives in ancient times, but also how they did resist them. Besides, one can also understand how tradition has reinforced this violence and this injustice in the textual transmission, reception, and interpretation of materials created by or concerned with ancient women. One can also understand how we can try to circumvent such epistemological violence and injustice in our own scholarly practice nowadays. So let's deal with some of the chapters of the books. And here I'll focus mainly on the texts written by the authors present here with us today, that is, the editors themselves. First of all, I highlight Mary Gilbert's chapter, Engendering Knowledge with the Okeanids in Prometheus Bound, which advances some illuminating discussion of the play, focused on the Okeanids and Io from a feminist perspective theory. In my view, the author presented very important points to understand the evolution of the Okeanids as characters within the play and their relation to both Prometheus and Io. Her interpretation of Prometheus, by the way, is quite compelling also. Still, I have one question. The analysis focuses on the text, and only in one instance, Mary Gilbert alludes to the poet, saying, and I quote, "By staging the Okeanids' support of Io's eager but vulnerable drive to know, and by dramatizing their reaction to her suffering, the Prometheus-bound poet establishes female experience as an important source of human knowledge, and thereby sets the scene for a final bold act of disobedience that flies in the face of patriarchal authority." End of the quote. So here I question, how do you understand this relation between the world of male oppression and the capacity some male poets may display of representing critical aspects of that reality? I mean, did Aeschylus, or whoever composed this play, understand the mechanics behind the empathy between oppressed people? Did he understand epistemic injustice, epistemic violence, and epistemic vice in connection with the situation of women in ancient Greece? Moving on, in Bodies of Knowledge, Diotima's expertise in the symposium, Edith Nally offers a luminous reading that assesses Diotima's teaching through a feminist standpoint theory, showing how the ladder of love is best understood as anchored in practices akin to the ethics of care. By drawing attention to the maternal metaphors of conception, birth, and nourishment, Nally discloses how Diotima links moral development not only to an abstract, atomistic, and individualistic ascent toward the forms, but also to the concrete and intimate commitment of nurturing another's growth in virtue. This perspective allows us to appreciate more fully the triangulated relationship between Diotima, Socrates, and Plato. The ladder of love, often read as a purely metaphysical itinerary toward the theory of forms, emerges instead as a dialogue between gendered experiences of knowledge, care, and transcendence. At the same time, I ought to admit that Plato still seems to me to be appropriating a female practice and a female epistemic acquisition through a depuration of its engendered aspects in order to put it to a service in a philosophical context conceived as mainly male or even strictly male. So even if, in my opinion, Nally's reading restores to Diotima's speech its original richness, I cannot fully agree with the idea that, and here I quote, "The symposium suggests that women like Diotima can and should engage in the very sort of psychic relationship often thought to elude women and disqualify them from participating in pederastic educational practices." And what I mean is, can we mention one single instance where the symposium had actually been read in this way to support any ancient demand of women taking part in philosophy? And the last one, with Megan Bowen, we have the text, "But she didn't complain, Ovid's Leucotho, rape myths, and hermeneutical injustice." This is a sharp and necessary intervention in both classical scholarship and feminist theory, offering a nuanced account of how Ovid's narrative strategies both expose and perpetuate false cultural ideologies about sexual violence. By foregrounding the shifting terminology used to describe Leucotho's experience, amor, vis, adulterium, stuprum, Bowen highlights Ovid's play with narrative authority and ambiguity, while showing how these very ambiguities might obscure Leucotho's suffering and perpetuate epistemic harm. The text's strength lies in its careful articulation of hermeneutical injustice to understand the complex situation depicted by Ovid. Leucotho is wronged not only through violence, but also through the cultural frameworks that fail to name her experience adequately, a failure that resonates disturbingly with contemporary rape myths. Even if I believe that Ovid's text might have a great potential in denouncing the violences he depicts with such attention to details, one ought to agree with Bowen that, and here I quote, Ovid's work does not ultimately dismantle Rome's gendered epistemology, end of the quote. The only thing I wonder is, what kind of work of ancient literature could actually be considered to have dismantled Rome's gendered epistemology? Do we have any example of that? And here I finish. As a whole, the book demonstrates that feminist epistemology is not merely a theoretical overlay, but a set of practices that fundamentally alter how we read, interpret, and value ancient sources. By foregrounding epistemic injustice and interpretive multiplicity, Believing Ancient Women equips scholars with conceptual tools that are as rigorous as they are liberating. It is a volume that will not only shape the study of women in antiquity, but also reverberate across disciplines concerned with knowledge, power, and the politics of interpretation. For anyone interested in the intersections of classics, philosophy, and feminist theory, this book is not only important, it is indispensable. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rafael. I have to confess, it's a pleasure to have here you. He was a student of mine the first semester as undergraduate student. Thank you. Once a teacher, always teacher. Now, before I give the floor to Elena, to the editors, I will pass to Elena, Duce, to comment Andromake's book. Thank you, Elena, please.
Thank you so much for the presentation and for the opportunity. I didn't know the rest of the organizers in person, but thank you so much for the privilege, as Andromake mentions, of commenting and knowing this book. I was aware of previous books and articles from Andromake Karanika, but it was completely new and it was a powerful discovery, I would say. So in order to be strict to the time, I have prepared a text that I will read and also have prepared a very small presentation, but I don't have the permission. So if you can give me them, if not, it's not necessary at all.
I think I did. Maybe try again now.
Now I can. Thank you. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay, let's go. In Wedding, Gender, and Performance in Ancient Greece, Andromake Karanika undertakes in an in-depth study of weddings from a gender perspective. Aware of previous scholarship from an iconographical standpoint and grounded in the sources, she focuses on the performance of a wedding, primarily from the bride's point of view. While acknowledging that most sources came from Athens and elite marriages, she establishes a broad chronological framework, ranging from the Homeric poems to the Hellenistic novel. She centers on maidens prepared for marriage, examining mythical cases such as Iphigenia, Creusa, and Chloe. Since my contribution is not intended to be an academic review, I would like to highlight certain thought-provoking aspects developed in the book. I contend that this book serves as a nexus bringing traditional scholarships on Greek weddings, which has predominantly examined aspects such as the legal ceremony, the exchange of gifts through the dowry, or the ensuing political connections, with a return to the ceremony itself and the lived experience it constituted for its participants. First, I would like to discuss the importance of emotionally in Greek weddings. Sensory experience in the Greek world were, with no doubt, an essential element in fostering communal feelings. Much has been published about the experience of visiting a sanctuary like Delphi, the whispers, smells, and tastes within a sacred space, but far fewer studies address this aspect in private or semi-private ceremonies. As the author rightly points out, a wedding is a ceremony where the sensory is ever present. Yet we have little certainty about the gender biases affecting the bride, the groom, and their guests. Although it is well established that the bride is the central figure of the ceremony, as she is the one who undergoes the change of residence, all guests and family members take part in a communal experience involving said rituals. These collectively enacted steps serve to establish bonds and seal the union in memory. In her analysis of wedding songs or epithalamia, she notes that we have only preserved the verses, with no information on when or how they were recited. Was it the bride's family responsibility, a shared activity? Did people of both genders participate? These questions arose as I read through the book, which recounts the steps of a ceremony. Moreover, we must consider a series of sounds and sensations that have left no material traces: the murmur of water at the Calirwe fountain, the clatter of lutrophory against the basin, the hazzard conversations during the bridal bath. With no doubt, there was a contrast between the private actions within the home walls, such as the final farewell between mother and daughter, which the author emphasizes, and the clinking of cups, the clatter of dishes, and the guest chatter during the banquet. Undoubtedly, the presentation of an unveiling of the bride, the most thrilling moment of a wedding, form a part of this sensory experience, and the wedding song served to spotlight the bride, who was publicly displayed. I found this section of the book inspiring in many ways. Until now, there has been an overproduction and analysis of legal aspects, and gender studies have largely focused on issues like guardianship and consent, rather than the bride's lived experience during her wedding and how it was perceived by their guests. I believe this could serve as a starting point for future research on the representation of the bride within the family through corporeality. After all, we are dealing with the former representation of the departure of a once hidden member, now handed over to a new destiny. Tragedy emphasizes the image of the Parthenos prepared for marriage, the very purpose for which she was raised. Greek heroines Parthenon poised for marriage, such as Chrysa or Iphigenia, appears to have traversed an entire life journey only to remain at the very threshold of their function as wives and future mothers. This lament, this pathos so prevalent in tragedy, speaks to the liminal moment they reveal connections in the collective functions of women as members of the Greek family. Karanika aptly correlates marriage with the end of childhood in both a physical and a symbolic sense. While the Parthenos is acknowledged as a sexual being, a topic previously explored by scholars such as Julia Caesar or Nicole Loho, Karanika focuses her lens on the poetic dimensions of childhood's end. Children, both boys and girls, are subjects who are cared for, loved and educated by their mothers. Marriage signifies the termination of the circle within teaching, but also songs were shared. Whether in lullabies, epithalamia, or funeral laments, we encounter chants performed by female family members in both public and private spaces. Caring for children, teaching them the Greek language and custom, was the duty of Greek mothers, but their success or failure was made public. The wedding marks the final farewell between mother and daughter, as the latter becomes the companion of a new household and assumes the obligation of bearing new children. Thus, I find the idea that an epithalamion is the last lullaby particularly compelling. A similar connection exists with funeral laments, although here I emphasize their link to the wedding processions. In an ancient world that believed outdoors, the wedding procession was a moment of leisure and noise, drawing the neighbors' attention with the number of participants, the attire, the flowers, and of course, the music. A funeral shares similar elements, crowds gathering and processing, the importance of the deceased measured by the number of attendants, and women playing a key role in the lamentations. These three songs, the lullaby, the wedding song, and the funeral lament, tie women to collective poetic composition and position them as prominent figures in family performance. They also grant them full recognition, transcending class barriers that we often struggle to overcome when seeking information about humble Greek families. Also, luxurious garments, a great number of lutrophori, jewels, and Phoenician perfumes with their sensual scents were objects that only an elite could afford. All families could organize a wedding according to their means. Songs, however, belong to everyone. To intone, share, and rejoice to music and dance is a practice that transcends economic status. For this reason, the analysis of the sensory experience provides a lens through which to have access to the weddings of both upper and lower classes. In a way, the author succeeds in giving voice and sound to the wedding scenes we know so well from red figure pottery, exams analyzed, Sinos Oakley, or Victoria Sabritai with great conclusions. She provides context from the connection between the private world within the Gynecian walls and its emerge into familiar representation. In conclusion, this book offers a novel and relevant perspective that positions song and music as central to the performance of a Greek wedding. It is an inspiring book both for students specializing in the field and for scholars of philology, archaeology, and history. By focusing on immaterial aspect, it provides a crucial context for interpreting the information we have received from written and archaeological sources. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elena. We still have 21 minutes. And as usual, I would like to give the floor first to the editors, Mary, Megan, and Edith, to make any comment, if you want, about Rafael's comment, and later to Andromake to comment also Elena's comment. And if anyone here have questions, can use the chat or later the microphone. So we still have time for other discussion too. Mary, Edith, and Megan, the floor is.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that really thoughtful commentary on believing ancient women. We really appreciate that, Rafael. So as to your question about my particular chapter, I guess I'll first of all say no, I don't think the writer of Prometheus Bound was a feminist epistemologist or really kind of thinking about things, the framework that we lay out in the book. But I guess I do kind of see him as, or her, it's an anomaly, but probably him, but I likely see this author as, more sympathetic to these daughters. And if you look at Greek authors, they'll often maybe, if they're going to be sympathetic to female characters, it's more likely to be a daughter than a wife. But I think that the kind of complex way that the Oceanids are characterized, it has been the fact that it's been overlooked in modern scholarship says something maybe a little bit about the way that that we read and expect to read patriarchy in ancient texts, and it's a very patriarchal play in other respects. But I think that, I mean, it's hard for me to imagine that this author isn't familiar with girls and daughters and the ways they ask questions, and the kind of, even though the Oceanids, they don't come across as really kind of expert orators or anything like that, like some of the other female characters in Greek tragedies. The kind of pointed ways they ask questions, they keep coming back to things. It's hard for me to imagine that he wasn't kind of sympathetic to daughters. And I think this is something that people who work on Greek tragedy kind of think about a lot, is that how can this really patriarchal system have created so many interesting female characters? And I guess another thing I would say is that in a world like classical Athens, where there is really no possibility of women getting power, of like the Lysistrata actually happening, I think that there may be like more space in the male imaginary to think about interesting and complex and knowledgeable and kind of female characters than when it is like in ancient Rome, you actually get powerful women, and there's this real backlash against that, where you might, and so in that kind of situation, you might get fewer complex literary characters because you've got these complex actual women who do have some real power. So, that's just like my first thoughts on your question, but thank you so much. And it's a great question.
Hi, I'll go next. Rafael, thank you so much for your comments on the book as a whole. I think you really got the ethos, the spirit of it. And I'll just address the question you had about me, which is a question I get all the time about this paper, whether or not Plato seems to be appropriating female reproductive experience, because the metaphors are obviously supposed to be for the male pederastic relationship. So I thought about it long and hard, and I'll just say I addressed it in 4 places in the chapter. So if you want to hear more about it, I would direct you back there. But the one that I find most persuasive, well, first I'll say connected Diotima through her Mantinean provenance to the Pythagorean women. So there's a kind of potential way in which Plato is depicting other philosophical schools which did have women involved. And I'm pretty persuaded by that. I don't go into it in the chapter, but Mary and Megan and I are doing some work on philosophical women now, and I'm realizing there's probably a lot more out there for us to work on. So I'll just kind of leave that hanging. But within the text itself, Diotima is treated as a clear epistemic authority in the frame when he talks about her role in the plague. I make an argument there that she actually has wisdom, not just techne, like in the Theaetetus. But the one I find most persuasive is that she has knowledge of the forms. For Plato, that's like a ringer. That is epistemic success. And I'll say it's weird. Nobody talks about this, with maybe the exception of like Nightingale in one place. Plato is imagining the forms having pre-Platonic provenance, pre-Socratic provenance. And it's really interesting, given the reproduction metaphors, that Diotima is implanting these in Socrates, and then Socrates is implanting them in Plato, at least in this story. And that's what the ideal lovers of the symposium do. They implant their ideas in other people, and then they continue for generations. So Diotima, I say this in the chapter, she's actually like the matriarch of one of the, Plato had no way of knowing, but one of the best known philosophical schools of all time. So I find that really persuasive in thinking he's not just appropriating her experience, he's showing her as the provenance of something he thinks is central to understanding. I don't know how persuasive anyone thinks that is, but it's in the chapter.
I think it's quite persuasive, actually. But my point is only that the way he deals with maternal experience is not evaluating the maternal experience in itself, but only as a way of depurating it to get like an image to construct the idea of what he's actually doing in representing what's going on in the symposium. But I agree with everything you said, everything.
Thank you.
Okay, I can go ahead and go. Again, I'll just echo Mary and Gwen for thanking you for a really thoughtful response to our book. And thanks for what you said about my chapter in particular. I guess I sort of just agree with you. What kind of work could have been seen to dismantle? I think it wasn't dismantled, right? So I don't have I don't have anything to point to, but I'll just say I think that is. I'm not sure I can imagine any work in any time doing it. That there is sort of always this push and pull between dismantling and reinforcing. As you sort of, have to draw attention to a thing, you reinforce it. So I don't know that I have much else to say on that.
Yeah,
you.
I mean, the only thing is that for me, it always seems that Ovid went the further possible. When we compare him to Horace or to Virgil or whomever from the Latin poetry, he seems to be the furthest possible in this context.
Oh yeah, he's the closest. He's the closest we get.
Okay, thank you again, Andromake.
Thank you for this very thoughtful engagement with my work, Elena. I really appreciate it. I think you brought a lot of the sort of things in my mind and the structure and about the book and how it was conceptualized from the legal to the sensory to the emotions. But what I think is really important is to, and it's always when I write a conclusion or a concluding paragraph even, is like, what kind of scholarship do you envision coming after that? And because ultimately we're part of a chain, we learn and we contribute, and then hopefully we in a way channel more scholarship on that. So I was really intrigued, impressed, and it's something that is very much in my mind, and I can do it as a kind of a self-criticism. What you said at the very end, the upper and the lower sort of the elite. I mean, a lot of it is kind of the elite understanding. So I think this is an angle that I hope future scholars will follow and probe a little bit more. I don't think I did as much. And it's interesting when I think sort of from a more satellite kind of point of view, like Greek materials versus sort of Roman materials. I think we have a better access on the marginalized voice and better discourse on the Roman wedding as opposed to the Greek wedding. So that's something I'd like us to keep, and hopefully I'll see more people working towards that. And again, combining the archaeological and the philological. And I'm kind of inspired by the epistemology volume and by all the chapters, but I do want to use the word that Gwen just used about Diotima as a kind of a matriarch. And in a way, use it as a parallel. In many ways, when you think about wedding, and especially if you kind of zoom in on the wedding song, Sappho is a bit of a matriarch there. It's like the originary poetry, that everything is kind of like the big idea. And there is I mean, I have some trouble with, I felt that I did that, and Irina does it, and but there's an interesting sort of trend in how we view a lot of the Greek sources with some of the sort of epistemic authorities that are then glimpsed in other sources. So that's also something to sort of think for future research. So thank you.
It's a pleasure, and I work with marriage in lower classes in ancient Greece, so that's why it's a question that I pose everywhere. And I think that we have, of course, sources from the elite, but also they are used by lower classes, but with a different budget. And I think a song is one of the keys. So you can invoke the perfumes and flowers came from flowers from Piera, and so forth. And maybe you can't afford them, but you are using them symbolically in order to provide richness to your ceremony. So that was one of the things that I think that inspires me in my work. So.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? I don't see anything in the chat. Jacqueline? Oh, yes, please. Emily?
Thank you so much for those wonderful presentations. Really, very much enjoyed it. Just following on from Nally's chapter there, I've been working on Xenophon in recent years, and I wanted to throw in the mix, going back, right back to Ischomachus's wife, because I think there's a possibility for sort of reading against the grain a little, more along the lines perhaps of what you were just doing with Plato there, Gwen. If we look at Xenophon's some of his broader concerns, it's not just Ischomachus's wife and Xenophon who needs a teacher. I think Xenophon sees everyone as a need of it, and to be subordinate is another way of talking of obedience. And the Spartans, one of the best things about them, according to Xenophon, is how obedient they are. And then I also wanted to note that the idea of empowering a woman to reward tous sophronas, tekai, tous ophelimus, the sophron, those with sophrosune, and the helpful, and ophelimos is a word he uses for Socrates as well, to be empowered to reward others in this way is also something we see all of Xenophon's excellent leaders doing. So I just wanted to throw in the mix the possibility that a broader perspective suggests that here Xenophon might not be being quite so resistant to feminist epistemologies as it might first seem. So I'd just like to throw that out there. I see Xenophon certainly not as progressive in the context of the 21st century, but really is doing some things that are quite striking for 5th, 4th century Athens.
Thank you, Emily. That's really interesting, and yeah, I think in some ways that's completely right. If you read Ischomachus's wife a little bit later, it turns out she adopts this male way of thinking, and she's praised as this like great female woman. She's male because she's got this ability to teach and train others. But I still Xenophon is an author really interested in epistemology, but he is also still a very patriarchal author in my mind, and interested in like how knowledge gets shaped and gets passed on. So one thing that's cool about working on Xenophon as a feminist is that he exposes the way patriarchy works. So I don't know that Xenophon is more patriarchal than anyone else, but he understands the way the system, the knowledge building and the knowledge construction works. So he's really fun to work on because of the way he exposes it, but it's still he's exposing a very patriarchal
I would
system,
love to see that alternative reading though, Emily. Like I think
hopefully soon.
I'd love to see it. I'm
way too long.
Yeah. Because when we were first putting together those really short case studies, those were like papers that we didn't get to write. And I was really drawn to that case as we were writing, and I was like, man, there's just like another chapter here. But I do think what you would be saying is you're more optimistic to use those Alison Chirac ways of interpreting like different interpretive frameworks for feminist theory. You would just be more optimistic maybe about what Xenophon is up to.
Yeah, well, I guess, I see him fitting women in, and absolutely I think he's doing something that can be interpreted way more optimistically than I'd argue Aristotle, for instance, and some others.
Oh, yeah.
Women, to my mind, he sees them as really part of that big subgroup of, human beings, as opposed to seeing women. I mean, this is a case that I'm making, but I think there is some cause there potentially for optimism. Even, Ischomachus, it's clear he's got some limits by comparison to Xenophon, and yet there's there's still room for optimism, I think.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it.
Oh, thank you. But I thoroughly enjoyed these, both the publications. I haven't seen Mackie's yet. I need to, I need to see it. But I've certainly seen Feminist Epistemologies, wonderful volumes. Thank you.
So, thanks again. There is a comment here by Evie Hayes, undergraduate students from the Department of Classes, but also my students. It's a comment about how was static hearing about Andromake research. I think everyone's agreeing with this, no? Especially women erasing her past identity and Helen being a triple bride. So I don't know if Andromake would like to make a comment.
Well, thank you. Thank you. That's very, it's very beautiful, and I'm humbled, really.
Thank you. Jacqueline, would you like to?
No, thank you. It was a very rich, interesting session. It was very, thank you, and congratulations to all writers and speakers. Okay.
Well, we still have 2 minutes. I would like just to make a brief comment about the book on epistemology, because it's curious how this word that was created in the 19th century in such a very specific moment, in a, like we say, a Galilean and Newtonian approach to knowledge, how it was created in a sense that it would limitate this the scope and put scientific as a pattern to consider knowledge, and how it changed in some sense the meaning with your book. I don't know if you have any consideration about it. And to Andromake, I would like just to thank, and it would be a comment also on Helen, how this the wedding of Helen, which was so complicated, and it generated part of the literature we have since Homer, but how it is in some sense they know, and it can be praised, but also it was a kind of she was a kind of Bascanus, anyway. But if you want to make
you're touching my next project, kind of an evil eye, because it really is interesting that we have these women, complicated figures, with not a very happy end story.
Okay.
So I think there's more going in there, but it's difficult to kind of understand the cognitive processes. So you really touched the core of something cultural.
Helen was this Euripides. Helen was the subject of my PhD, and now I'm working on a book on her. But I will write to you probably. Thank you. Any question? Well, we passed 1 minute, but I would like just to inform that the next meeting will be in November 25. So you are invited. I hope to see you again here. I thank very much for your presence, the speakers, the commenters. As I said, we have the record of this site in YouTube. You can see it again. You can send to other people also who are not able to come. I thank you all for your presence, also the audience. And last but not least, I thank you very much, Jacqueline, for the project.
Cecília. More.
And also my the students, Sophia and Nicholas, for the assistant. So thank you very much. Bye. Bye.